Hi guys, Miss Francis here to discuss evidence that helped support Darwin's theory of evolution. The first key piece of evidence involves fossils. Fossils are the relics or impressions of organisms that are mineralized in sedimentary rocks, where the layers of the rock are called strata, and each successive strata gets younger, meaning the closer that rock layer is to the surface, the younger that rock layer is. This is how Lamarck started his theory of evolution. He looked at fossils, and what he realized was that the fossils within the layers showed differences, showed a succession of organisms that have populated Earth throughout time. For example, a series of fossils documented the changes in skull shape and size that occurred as mammals evolved from reptiles. Darwin used his observation about artificial selection to help support his ideas regarding natural selection. Artificial selection is when humans artificially select organisms for their favorable traits. So, for example, if a farmer wants to breed corn, that farmer might plant a seed that produced corn that was either the largest or the sweetest or produced the biggest kernels. The humans were selecting individuals with the desired traits. So what that showed Darwin, well, then the environment, natural selection, must also play a role in choosing which heritable adaptations make that organism most fit. So what Darwin envisioned was this diversity of life as evolving by this gradual accumulation of minute changes, very small changes, through the actions of natural selection over long periods of time. Well, then other key pieces of evidence helped further support Darwin's theory of evolution, which said that we all come from a common ancestor. So comparative anatomy involves comparing bone structure. For example, the forelimbs of humans, cats, whales, and bats all share the same skeletal elements. So these are called homologous structures. In other words, they are structures that are similar because all of these organisms have a common ancestor. There are other structures called analogous structures. Analogous structures are structures that are similar due to a common habitat or a common environment. So, for example, if you look at the fin of a shark, a wing of a penguin, a flipper of a dolphin, they all have similar structures because they were all involved in aquatic environments. There are also organs that are vestigial. Vestigial organs are structures which have lost their usefulness. For example, in humans, we've got wisdom teeth. We have an appendix. We no longer use the wisdom teeth to break down bones as our ancestors may have once eaten. We don't use our appendix anymore. So those wisdom teeth that you get out really have no bearing on your life. They're uselessness. They are useless, which is why they can be removed without any harm. Another example of vestigial organs are the pelvis and leg bones of walking ancestors that are found in snakes or whales. Another key piece of evidence that's used to help support Darwin's theory of evolution is comparative molecular biology. So that involves comparing organisms on a molecular level, comparing organisms' RNA and DNA, comparing organisms' proteins. This is the most powerful piece of evidence that scientists can use as support for evolution. For example, the DNA sequence for coding for hemoglobin is exactly the same in humans as it is in chimps. Therefore, that implies that there must have been some sort of recent common ancestor. Darwin also used the geographical distribution of species to help create his theory of evolution. It's called biogeography. And what Darwin noticed was that species tend to be more closely related to other species from the same area than to other species with the same way of life, but living in different areas. So, for example, there are marsupial mammals that have lookalikes in North America, but they are placental mammals. Now, they have a similar way of life and they look alike. There's a resemblance. However, these marsupial mammals are more closely related to other marsupial mammals than they are to their look-alike placental mammals. So, for example, the sugar glider and the flying squirrel, they have adapted to the same mode of life. There is a resemblance between the sugar glider found in Australia and the flying squirrel found in North America. They look similar to one another. However, these sugar gliders are more closely related to other marsupial mammals, not to a placental mammal such as the flying squirrel. What this is an example of is called convergent evolution, where organisms are similar due to similar environments. Another type of evolution is known as divergent evolution, when two species originate from a common ancestor. So here would be your common ancestor, but then evolve differences over time. So if we were to summarize divergent and convergent evolution, we could say that this would be the image that would represent convergent evolution. It's when there's a resemblance between organisms due to similar habitats, causing similar adaptations to that habitat, to that environment. And your example would be the sugar glider and the flying squirrel. On the other hand, if we wanted to summarize divergent evolution, this would be the image we could draw for divergent evolution. And it's when organisms have a common ancestor, but evolve differences over time. For example, humans and chimpanzees. Some other examples of biogeography include the observations that Darwin made on islands. Often islands have many species of plants and animals that are endemic, meaning they are native to that specific island. They have adapted characteristics that are favorable for that island's specific environment. So when Darwin observed, when he reassessed his collections from the Beagle's voyage, what he noticed was that the species are typically related more closely to the species on the nearest mainland rather than other species from island groups. And what this is known as is adaptive radiation. It occurs when a species diverges into many species by basically spreading out or radiating out to the different islands, since each one of those islands has its own selective pressures, has its own environmental conditions. Two classic examples are the finches that Darwin observed on the Galapagos Islands. The beaks of the finches varied based on the food that was available on that particular island. Another example are fruit flies, or the Drosophila, found on the Hawaiian Islands. The Hawaiian Islands contain the most diverse Drosophila collection because these Drosophilas have adapted to the unique environment that is present on each one of the Hawaiian Islands. Some further evidence of natural selection has occurred during our lifetime. For example, insecticide resistance and organisms that have developed resistance to drugs, such as drug-resistant viruses and drug-resistant bacteria. So first, let's tackle insecticide resistance. So for example, DDT was an insecticide that was sprayed to kill insects. Now, there were variations among these insects, and some of these insects had a favorable variation. It was a gene that contained the resistance to that pesticide. So now when that DDT is sprayed, the organisms that don't contain that gene, that favorable trait, all die. But the organism that does contain the favorable trait survives, reproduces, and then is able to pass that favorable trait, which is the trait for resistance, on to its offspring. Another example of natural selection in action or natural selection in modern times are strains of HIV that are resistant to drugs. That's why HIV patients sometimes have to take a cocktail of drugs, because the different drugs can sometimes kill the different mutant strains of HIV. Another example is multi-drug resistant tuberculosis, which is what developed in prisons in Russia. Because those Russian prisons were often very crowded, tuberculosis spread rapidly and was able to develop a resistance to the medication that was supposed to kill them.